On August 1st, 2025, US President Donald Trump shocked North American trade by hiking tariffs on Canadian goods to 35%, a sudden blow that hit even staple imports like potatoes. Within weeks, over 140,000 tons of Canadian potatoes were stopped cold at the border, supply chains snarled, and prices at American diners spiked. In Canada, instead of retreating, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a sweeping $1.6 billion export deal with Asian markets, signaling a bold pivot away from US dependence. The tension was immediate, the stakes enormous. With farmers on one side and fast food chains on the other, both nations now find themselves locked in a standoff over a humble crop that feeds millions. The question is, has this potato war just rewritten the rules of North American trade forever? For decades, potatoes were more than just a crop. They were a quiet, dependable thread in the fabric of US-Canada trade. From Prince Edward Island's red earth fields to Idaho's wide plains, the flow of spuds across the border was steady, almost ceremonial. Canada supplied the US with premium varieties prized for their quality and consistency, feeding everything from household dinner tables to the deep fryers of McDonald's franchises nationwide. Under the USMCA framework, agricultural trade enjoyed relative stability, with farmers on both sides investing confidently in planting schedules, storage facilities, and transport infrastructure. But the signs of strain began to appear in the early 2020s. Even before the August 2025 tariff hike, whispers of economic nationalism and protecting domestic growers were becoming policy slogans in Washington. The Trump administration had already flirted with higher agricultural tariffs as a bargaining chip in disputes over lumber, dairy, and steel. While potatoes had avoided the front lines of earlier trade fights, shifting political winds made it clear that no commodity was entirely safe. Canada, for its part, was diversifying slowly, but still relied heavily on the US market. Nearly two-thirds of its potato exports went south of the border. Trade analysts warned that this dependency was a strategic vulnerability, but with demand steady and profit margins strong, the warnings went largely unheeded. The first cracks widened in mid-2025 when domestic US potato growers, emboldened by protectionist rhetoric, began lobbying hard for a bigger slice of the market. By July, reports were circulating of a pending tariff increase targeting non-essential Canadian imports. That label, slapped onto one of North America's most consumed food staples, signaled a political shift from cooperation to confrontation, a move that would trigger the largest shakeup in the potato trade in living memory. The tipping point came swiftly and without the usual drawn-out trade negotiations. On August 1st, 2025, the Trump administration announced an immediate tariff hike on certain Canadian goods, raising duties from 25% to 35%. While the White House insisted this was part of a broader effort to rebalance trade and protect American farmers, the move was seen by many as a targeted strike against one of Canada's most resilient export sectors, potatoes. Official statements framed the measure as necessary to shield domestic growers from what Trump described as unfair competition, arguing that Canadian producers benefited from government subsidies and favorable logistical routes into the US market. The administration also claimed that Canadian potatoes, particularly frozen and processed varieties, were undercutting US prices and threatening rural farming communities in states like Idaho, Washington, and Wisconsin. In practical terms, the tariff instantly disrupted established supply chains. Distributors who had long relied on Canadian shipments found their costs ballooning overnight. A $22 wholesale bag of processed potatoes could now approach $30 after tariffs, freight, and handling fees. The consequences rippled through the food industry. Fast food chains saw their fry costs surge. Some Midwest McDonald's outlets reported menu price increases of 50% on large fries, jumping from $3.29 to $5. In some cases, managers resorted to smaller portion sizes or cheaper domestic alternatives that lacked the taste and texture customers were used to. Behind closed doors, lobbying pressure was intense. American potato growers, many of whom had been clamoring for relief from Canadian competition, seized the moment to push for long-term import restrictions. The National Potato Council issued statements praising the administration's bold leadership and urging that the 35% tariff be made permanent. But the strategy was not without risk. Economists quickly pointed out that the U.S. potato sector, while robust, could not immediately fill the supply gap left by Canada. The tariff disrupted not just price points, but also the seasonal balance between supply and demand. Canada's growing regions, with their unique climate and soil profiles, produced specific varieties and volumes that complemented, not simply competed with, U.S. crops. By removing this equilibrium, the U.S. risked overburdening its own farmers, while forcing consumers to absorb higher costs. Political analysts noted another dimension. The tariff wasn't just about agriculture, it was part of a broader push by Trump to renegotiate trade leverage with Canada on multiple fronts: energy, timber, and manufacturing. By hitting a high-profile commodity with everyday consumer impact, the administration sent a clear message: no sector was off-limits. Whether this would force Canada to the negotiating table or drive it to diversify away from the U.S. was a gamble. If Washington expected Ottawa to blink, it underestimated Canada's resolve. Within days of the tariff announcement, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau convened emergency meetings with provincial leaders and industry representatives. Their message was clear: Canada would not engage in a tit-for-tat tariff war over potatoes, but neither would it sit idle while a critical export market was destabilized. Rather than retaliate directly against U.S. goods, Canada accelerated talks that had been quietly underway with Asian trade partners. By late August, Carney stood before cameras in Vancouver announcing a $1.6 billion Canadian deal to expand potato exports, both fresh and processed, to Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. The agreement emphasized Canada's strengths: strict food safety standards, transparent supply chains, and premium product branding. This pivot served multiple purposes. Economically, it created an immediate alternative outlet for the surplus left by the U.S. market's contraction. Politically, it signaled to both domestic audiences and international observers that Canada was capable of sidestepping American economic pressure. Strategically, it advanced long-term diversification goals that trade experts had been advocating for years. Still, the short-term pain was real. The 40 to 41% drop in U.S.-bound potato exports in Q2 2025 translated to over 140,000 tons of unsold product that had to be redirected or stored. Processing plants in Prince Edward Island and Manitoba operated below capacity, and some seasonal workers were sent home early. Farmers faced cash flow crunches as payments from long-standing American contracts evaporated. Yet the government's messaging reframed the crisis as an opportunity. Bibeau toured agricultural hubs, assuring growers that federal support programs and export credit guarantees would bridge the gap until new markets matured. Provincial governments rolled out marketing campaigns in Asian languages emphasizing Canada's clean and green image. Industry groups began exploring niche markets, such as premium snack brands in Tokyo or high-end frozen products in Seoul, where Canadian potatoes could command higher margins than in the price-sensitive U.S. market. In this way, Canada's response was both defensive and offensive, protecting its producers from immediate collapse while laying the groundwork for a more resilient, diversified export portfolio. But this pivot also meant accepting that the era of near-total reliance on the U.S. for potato exports was over, a shift with profound implications for future agricultural planning. By early autumn, the contours of the standoff were clear. The U.S. held firm on its 35% tariff, bolstered by domestic growers and nationalist rhetoric. Canada, instead of seeking tariff relief, doubled down on new markets and trade alliances. Neither side appeared eager to make concessions. For American consumers, this meant enduring higher prices and inconsistent quality. For Canadian farmers, it meant navigating the logistical and regulatory hurdles of breaking into distant Asian markets. Both sides bore costs. Yet both also found political value in standing their ground. Trade negotiators on each side of the border quietly admitted that there was no quick fix. Rolling back the tariff without a broader political win for Trump was unlikely. Reversing Canada's pivot toward Asia risked undermining its newfound leverage. Thus, the potato trade, once a symbol of quiet cooperation, became a case study in 21st century trade politics. Deeply interconnected economies locked in a cycle of mutual pain, with neither willing to blink first. Whether this deadlock breaks through negotiation, further escalation, or simply time remains uncertain. In Prince Edward Island, potato farming isn't just an industry, it's a way of life. On a brisk September morning, the McLeod family farm, a third-generation operation, was supposed to be shipping truckloads of premium russet potatoes to a longtime buyer in the Midwest. Instead, the trucks sat idle. Since the August 1st tariff hike, their U.S. contracts, worth nearly $2 million annually, had been frozen. "It's not just losing sales," said owner James McLeod in a local radio interview. "It's losing a relationship we've built for decades." Across Canada, similar stories unfolded. The 40 to 41% drop in U.S.-bound potato exports in Q2 2025 meant more than 140,000 tons of surplus had to be dealt with. Cold storage facilities reached capacity, forcing some farmers to offload product at a loss to domestic processors or redirect it to low-margin markets. Processing plants in Manitoba reduced shifts, sending seasonal workers, many of them temporary foreign laborers, home weeks earlier than planned. The federal government's 1.6 billion Canadian dollars deal with Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia offered a lifeline, but execution was complex. Shipping potatoes across the Pacific meant higher freight costs, stringent import inspections, and the need for tailored packaging and labeling. Even with strong demand in Asia for high-quality Canadian produce, it would take months, if not years, to fully replace lost U.S. volumes. Still, industry leaders framed this as a necessary evolution. The crisis exposed the fragility of depending on a single export market, and many growers acknowledged that diversification was overdue. Yet in the short term, cash flow problems, unsold stock, and logistical bottlenecks left many rural communities facing a lean winter. South of the border, the effects were immediate and visible, not in fields, but in restaurants and grocery aisles. In Des Moines, Iowa, franchise owner Rachel Simmons noticed a shift almost overnight. Her McDonald's locations began paying nearly $8 more per 50-pound bag of frozen Canadian fries. That translated to menu hikes. Large fries that once cost $3.29 now sold for $5. Some customers complained, others quietly ordered smaller sizes. The quality issue was harder to ignore. Domestic suppliers stepped in, but their product wasn't always a match. Canadian fries are longer, crispier, they hold up better under heat lamps, Simmons explained. You can't swap them one-to-one without customers noticing. At the retail level, shoppers saw fresh potato prices inch up week after week. In some Midwestern cities, 10-pound bags climbed from $6.50 to nearly $9. For low-income households and seniors on fixed incomes, those increases were more than an annoyance. They were a real budget squeeze. Food manufacturers felt the pinch too. Frozen meal producers who relied on Canadian potato flakes and granules faced not just higher costs, but disruptions in supply consistency. Some resorted to reformulating recipes, which risked alienating loyal customers. Ironically, the very domestic growers the tariff aimed to protect also encountered challenges. With sudden demand spikes, some farms overextended, harvesting immature crops to meet contracts, which hurt yields later in the season. Others couldn't scale up fast enough, leading to spot shortages in certain regions. Economists noted that while tariffs can shield domestic producers in theory, in practice they often create secondary disruptions that ripple across entire industries. In this case, protecting Idaho farmers came at the expense of higher consumer prices, strained restaurant margins, and supply chain inefficiencies, a cost felt from rural towns to urban kitchens. The potato standoff has become more than a trade dispute. It's a litmus test for the future of North American economic ties. Both countries now stand at a crossroads. The US holding firm on tariffs to project strength, Canada accelerating its pivot toward Asia to secure independence. The once seamless agricultural bridge between neighbors is now fractured, and repairing it will require more than political posturing. In an era where food supply chains are as strategic as oil pipelines, the question lingers: will Washington and Ottawa choose to rebuild trust, or will this be the first of many fractures in a partnership once thought unshakable? If you found this story insightful, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more in-depth coverage.